David Knight, and on my program in the morning, I had Al Waddell on. He's a pastor in Montana. I've talked to a lot of different pastors because I think the key to all of this is we have to have leaders at the local community level. I think the solution to what is going on in these various places is not for President Trump to use the military, not for them to nationalize the police force even further. And I think the solution is that we have constitutional sheriffs, that we have law enforcement officers who take their oath to the Constitution seriously. But I think it's also important that we have pastors who will lead people and not allow them to be gaslighted to say that they have to obey orders that are not constitutional, because the Constitution is the real authority in this country, not a temporarily elected politician. And so I want to see a grassroots, a ground-up response to this. We need to start rebuilding our communities rather than continually looking to Washington for solutions. That is doomed to failure. That is what has gotten us to the position that we're in right now. Our passivity, our voyeurism, our delegation of our own responsibilities to other people is what has been destroying our individual liberty. And so I talked to a lot of different pastors, and I wanted to get on Al Waddell again. Thank you for joining us, Al. Tell us what's going on in Montana.
Well, the governor, of course, about 5 days ago or 6 days ago, issued an order mandating that all places of business require a mask. Now, what most places don't realize is, because they haven't even read the mandate or the order, there are numerous exceptions to his order. I think there are 9 of them. And the last exception is that if you have a medical condition that you can't wear a mask, you're exempted. But you might just as well try to shovel feathers in a wind to explain that to somebody business, because you can present as much evidence as you want, and they don't get it.
That's right. And we've witnessed that as well. And it is kind of a gradually escalating thing, because when Abbott here in Texas started doing that, they started carving out a few exceptions, like you're talking about, for your health and so forth. And yet when you go to Costco, for example, my wife goes there and says, no, I can't wear it because of health. Well, what is your health issue? It's like, it's none of your business what my health issue is. And then it gets to the next stage, which I've had employees of airlines contact me and say, particularly Delta, they said, well, now Delta is going to tell passengers who say they have a medical condition and they can't do this, they're going to have to get on the phone with a subcontractor of ours who is going to do a medical diagnosis over the phone to see whether they're going to do an interview with you and see whether or not they believe that you've got a health condition that should exempt you from wearing a mask. This is the way it progresses, and then it gets to the point where it's like, no, everybody's going to wear it. We don't really care what your health issues are.
Yes, David, that's exactly correct. And when I go out, I would say that about 90% of the people that I see walking around, not even in a store, are now wearing a mask.
Yes. And as you're talking, I know you're not. We've got an audio feed on you. As you're talking, they're running some video feed of encounters that people have shown where they go into a store and the customers there are so gaslighted by all this that not only do they have masks on, but you got customers who are ramming their shopping carts into another one because she doesn't have a mask on. They're getting physically violent with people.
That's right. I wrote a letter to the governor, and I told him, I said, what you've done, you have turned Montanans against each other.
Yes.
And of course, that's the plan. The plan is not to use the police. The plan is to use your next door neighbor.
That's right. Your next door neighbor, to make sure that you're not able to go into any retail spaces because these national retailers control and own everything. It's the same thing they did on the internet, on social media. Now they're rolling that out to the physical spaces that they now control. They say, well, we own it. We own everything in America. And so now you're going to do what we have to say. I mean, this is the way this is rolling out at this point, isn't it?
Yes. To speak to what you just said about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and what people should be concentrating on here. When I go out, I take with me the Constitution in my pocket. I take with me the governor's order, Xeroxed, And when I have the opportunity, I use that and say, look, read this. This is what it says. And then I try to explain as best I can as a testimony to them of what the truth is. Mm-hmm. And we talked a little bit about this in the last interview that you had with me. It's up to the people that are people like pastors and preachers to explain this to their people.
Yes.
I think back to Moses Mather, who was he came from a New England family of preachers, graduated from Yale in 1739. And he published a sermon called America's Appeal to the Impartial World. And he wrote this. He said, the English, to their immortal honor, claimed unalienable rights, and to transmit them to posterity, caused them to be reduced to writing, and in a most solemn manner to be confirmed by King John at Westminster Hall, where Magna Carta was read in the presence of bishops with lighted candles in their hands. The king, all the while laying his hand on his breast, swearing faithfully to observe all things therein contained, as he was a man, a Christian, a soldier, and a king. Then, now listen to this, the bishops extinguished the candles and threw them on the ground, and everyone said, thus let him be extinguished and stink in hell, who violates this great charter of liberty.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, and that exactly. That is that established the principle that the king was not above the law. And yet you're not going to be able to get that across to any of these college, quote unquote, educated people today. They don't want to hear anything about history or about the rule of law. For them, if you disagree with them, you have to be purged out of existence. All of them have become little petty absolute monarchs, haven't they?
Yes, they have. And these little monarchs and the greater monarchs, which makes me think of have you ever heard of the Magdeburg Confession?
No, I haven't.
Well, in 968, the Archbishop of Magdeburg, Germany, was established as a Roman Catholic principality, and the senior Catholic prelate there ruled the town and all the lands around it in every manner, worldly and spiritual, or under his control. So then along comes the Protestant Reformation, and the citizens of Magdeburg turned Protestant. And one of the results was that Magdeburg citizens then refused to obey the order to pay taxes to the Catholic Emperor Charles V. And that got the city attacked.
Yeah.
So in the uproar, just prior to the city entering a 13-month siege by the emperor, the Reformation pastors of Magdeburg wrote and signed what was called the Magdeburg Confession.
All right, we got to take a break, and we'll get that Magdeburg Confession when we come back. We're talking to Al Waddell, and we're also going to talk about a very interesting story he has about the attack on Pearl Harbor. He talked to someone who was involved on the Japanese side of that. We'll be right back. You know, human nature doesn't change. It's one of the reasons why it's so important to look at history and to learn lessons from history. Because human nature doesn't change, even though we are faced with weapons that mankind has never seen before. It's all the more important for us to understand the nature of power, how it corrupts, and human nature. And that's why I believe that it is imperative for pastors to take the lead and to educate the people that are around them as to the kinds of threats that they're about to face, and to understand how to deal with these threats. I mean, it's the same, what we're talking about here in terms of an educational standpoint is as imperative as defending life if somebody were to come into your group with a firearm and to start shooting people. I mean, you have to be able to defend the principles that are now under attack with all kinds of weapons. And we were just talking to Al Waddell, and we had to interrupt what he was having to say with a commercial break. You were talking about the Magdeburg Confession, and I want to get into that as well. And just to, I know exactly what you're talking about, but people need to understand how in centuries past, political power was concentrated into the hands of a local ruling official, typically in a city. And many times that throughout Europe, that political power was also coincident with religious power. I think, as you're talking about this, Al, I think about Salzburg when I went there with my family. There's a very famous palace there that everybody who has seen Sound of Music, and pretty much everybody has, the beautiful palace there called Mirabelle Palace. They have gardens there. That's where Julie Andrews and the kids were playing in the clothes that she made out of curtains and so forth, right? And that was a palace that was built by the Catholic Church official who essentially controlled that city. It was a very wealthy city because they had salt mines. That's why it was called Salzburg. And that was a very valuable commodity in those days. And so you'd have people who worked in the salt mines, and they would pay taxes to this official. And he, although he was supposed to be celibate, he was not very discreet about his affair with his mistress. As a matter of fact, it was for his mistress that he built that phenomenal Mirabelle Palace, and I had the privilege to attend a concert there, in the Marble Hall concert area. But tell us about what happened in Magdeburg as part of that confession, Al. Go ahead and continue your story.
Okay. Before I do that, just one clarification here. I am no longer a pastor. I've pastored big churches and small churches. I'm retired now, and I'm a preacher. Mm-hmm. That's what I've been since I started. I'm a preacher. Just to clarify that. Okay. Okay. Now back to the confession.
Preach it, Al. You got the floor. Go ahead, preach it.
All right. In fact, most of my churches, they never called me pastor. They would call me preacher.
That's good.
They referred to me, hey, preacher. Anyway, the confession is extremely important because it sets forth in a doctrinal format what later came to be known as this is the important part of this, the doctrine of the lesser magistrate. The lesser magistrate doctrine declares that when the higher or superior authority makes an unjust or immoral law or decree, the lower or lesser magistrate has both a right and duty to refuse obedience to the superior authority. And if necessary, that lesser authority even has the right, even the obligation to actually resist and oppose the superior authority. Now, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. When I was a pastor in Tucson, the federal government came after me and charged me with a violation of machine gun, having an unregistered machine gun, which I didn't have, but that's the story they made up. So the lesser authority is the state of Arizona. And the state of Arizona had no rules, regulations, or anything regulating the ownership of a machine gun. So at that point, the state of Arizona, being a lesser authority, should have stepped in and reprimanded the higher authority, the federal government, said, get out of our backyard.
Yes.
Now, and of course, I know you know this because we quote it all the time. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, you can't find anything in that article that says the federal government has any right whatsoever to legislate in the area of firearms and a whole bunch of other things. Mm-hmm. Just so that you get it, not you, but the royal you out there, they put amendments to the Constitution and said, just so you're clear on this, here's the Second Amendment. So this lesser authority, the state of Arizona, should have stepped in. There are other things to say about that, but they have a duty to do this. And so these Reformation pastors declared that the idea of unlimited submission to the state was an invention of the devil. Yes. And they rightly asserted that all authority is delegated from God, and that being the case, if the one in authority makes commands contrary to the law of God or the word of God, those subject to his authority have a right not to obey. and a duty to actively resist. And those pastors, I'll give you an example of what those pastors actually said on this business of unlimited submission and lesser right. Quote, let us take an example concerning a father of a family. If he should come to his wife or grown daughters in his house with some scoundrels in an obvious attempt to prostitute them, then his wife and daughters not only would not render their husband and father the obedience they otherwise owe him, but when they are not able to preserve their chastity in any other way, they should drive him off with stones.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And when we look at this, we talk about, different spheres of authority. And I think people understand that when you have a situation, you have a physically abusive father, then it is up to some other jurisdiction, let's say the local government, to come in and intervene in that situation. And under that same principle, we have other spheres of authority that are where you have that penetration. But that's, once somebody begins to act in an evil manner or abusive manner, then you have broken that authority. That's a basic principle. And so that goes back to the actions that are being done by the civil authorities. And it's even underscored by the fact that civil authorities are themselves under the Constitution. So they're not only acting evil, but they're acting in a way that is in direct violation of the Constitution when they impose these types of regulations on us under the presumption of protecting us for our own good from this mysterious disease.
That's right. They have no authority in that area. I mean, let somebody step forward and tell me where in the Constitution a medical man can come forward and start promulgating rules and regulations for how you live.
Yes.
Those pastors that I was talking about during the Reformation, they made their point that no one, not one person, no one in authority, whether in family, church, or civil government, holds his authority autonomously. It's designated and delegated to them from God. And
That's
if
right.
the authority, therefore, makes law, which contravenes the law of God, those subject to that authority can refuse obedience because, as they say,
and we're going to have to talk more about that. I'm going to have to get you on the morning show to finish that up because that is a key issue. We're going to have to address the tactics that they're using to push this out through corporations as well. Al Waddell, thank you so much for joining us. We got one more segment, and I was a bit confused. To apologize to the listeners and to Al because I thought we were at the very end of the show. I let Al go. It's too late for us to get him back. I was packing up, and Daria said, hey, you got one more segment here. It's like, oh, okay. Well, that's great. I got news to tell you, but I did really want to allow Al to finish that. We will have him finish that on the morning show, by the way. The best way to get a hold of me is David Knight Show at protonmail.com.